Hello and welcome to today's class in the How to Move Your Body yoga program. Today we're moving on from the foot and we're going to start looking at the ankle. Today's class is just going to be kind of a learning module for us to learn about the form and the function of the ankle so that it aids in our understanding of how our body is put together, which will help us as we move forward into the mobility components and improving our range of motion of the joint. So let's get started. Let's talk about our sweet little ankles here for a bit. So let me just get mine out and ready for action. Okay, so our ankle joint is the joint in the body that connects the foot, which we just went over, to the shin bone, really shin bones. So the foot is comprised of 26 bones, which is quite a lot when you think about it. But the reason why it's composed of so many bones is because that's what gives it its adaptability to the changing terrain underneath it. And so these bones, some of them are a little bit more flat and they attach on multiple surfaces. So while we have 26 bones, we also have 32 joints. So more joints than we have bones in the foot. And for the most part, the bones in the foot are kind of running out on the toe line. And so they all have different names and different pieces of them, as they go from metatarsals and then they turn into the phalanges at the toes and all of that good stuff. But as the bones trace back towards the ankle, then the bones kind of shift direction. And so instead of tracking straight ahead, they track more left to right across the foot. And so now on the underside of the foot, you have the heel bone. And then right on top of that, you have a bone called the talus. And the talus is actually the bone that comprises the bottom half of the ankle. So on top of the talus, you have two bones that go into it, and you can feel them, the knobby bits on the inner and outer edges. They're part of the two bones that trace down from the knee, although they have different names. But the inside one is when we refer to shin bone, because we have two bones that go down from the knee to the ankle, but most of the time we're just talking about shin bone singular. So when we're talking about the singular bone, we're talking about the bigger bone, the more dominant bone in the set. And that's the tibia. So that's the inside one, goes from the knee all the way down, and it creates that little knobby bit on the inside. And then the outer one is the fibula. That's a little bit smaller and it goes down again, and the knobby bit on the outside there is that. So tibia and fibula. That's not vocabulary that we'll need for the purposes of this program, but if you're interested in learning that kind of stuff, I try to remember tibia as like the dominant one, the shin one. When we talk about shin bone, we're talking about tibia. It's a little bit bigger. And then fibula, we can remember it's smaller by, sometimes you might say like, I told like a little white lie, but another way of saying lie or white lie is fib. So a little fib. And then that's the one that runs along the outside. So that's pretty much how the whole structure is formed down here, how the whole form is built down here. But then it needs to function. It needs to be able to do things and create changes. And the way that it does that is through its muscles. So the purpose of muscles is to pull on bones in order to move them in one direction or the other. And so we can look at kind of like what joint actions are possible here in the ankle. So then we know what our muscles are doing to create those actions. So our ankle can dorsiflex, that's when you pull the toes back to the knee, but it can also plantar flex, and that's when the toes point away from the shin. And so those are two ranges of motion that we're going to be getting into next week and learning how to develop them, how to assess our body for, where our progress can be. So a big part of our mobility is learning what the potential range of motion is in any one of our joints, and then where we are right now, and then figuring out intelligently how to bridge that gap. So the way I remember dorsiflexion, that's when the toes pull back, is from like dorsal fin, with like a dolphin or something, and it's always on the back, on the top of the dolphin. So I think about then lifting the top of my foot to my knee, and then I just know that the other word is plantar flexion, and then I just do that. That's the opposite one. So there's quite a bit of range of motion possible there, but there's also two other things that the ankle can do, and that's invert and evert. And so invert is where, I don't know the best way to kind of show this to the camera, but it's like pushing your pinky toe forward and like pulling your big toe up towards the inner knee. And so that's invert, and that's how I think about it. In as in inside. So I think of my inside foot lifting up. Then I can evert, and that's the opposite. So that's the big toe pushing away and the pinky edge pulling back towards the knee. And this is actually much more limited than our dorsal flexion and our plantar flexion. We have quite a bit less mobility when it comes to inverting and everting. And the reason for that is the structure of the joint. So as the two shin bones come down and they attach to the top of the talus, it's that attachment right there that actually is the limitation for our invert and our evert. Okay? So that's what it can do. And then we want to look at what muscles do we need to tap into in order to create those movements. So we'll talk about then the muscles of the foreleg right in here as they pertain to the ankle and to the movements of the ankle and the foot. So the one that we're probably the most familiar with is the one on the back of the leg, the calf muscle, the gastrocnemius as it might be called. There's another one that's a little bit deeper in called the soleus or soleus. I'm honestly not quite sure how to pronounce that. But these are quite large. The one you can feel on the outside, that's the calf muscle, quite large. It's very powerful as well. So potentially it can lift twice our body weight. And the reason why it needs to be this powerful is because it's the muscle responsible for pushing off with the foot. So we need that to be incredibly strong so we're able to do things like run away, so we're not becoming an easy target for someone else's dinner. Now, the way you can kind of remember what muscles do what is that muscles pull on bones, as I mentioned, in order to move them. And so if your muscle is getting smaller with contraction, and you can do this with your calf, like even as you're just sitting here, but squeeze your calf and contract it so that the muscle gets smaller. And what naturally happens is that it pulls the heel closer to the back of the knee into plantar flexion. So that's how we can kind of remember, it's like if my muscle's getting smaller, then what bone is it pulling on? Because the calf runs down and attaches via the Achilles tendon into the heel. So now I know it attaches into the heel. Therefore, if I make my calf smaller, it's going to pull my heel in some direction. That direction is going to be up towards the knee. So the muscles in the back of the leg, they're responsible for making us strong in our plantar flexion. So you can imagine that then if we just move around to the front of the leg, the muscles in the shin bone, they're going to be the ones responsible for lifting the top of the foot into dorsal flexion. And then we have muscles that run along the inner and outer, the side of the legs up here, and they run down and they stirrup the foot. And these are the muscles that are responsible for stabilizing us in a lot of positions. Last week, remember when we did our tightrope walk, one foot in front of the other, and we noticed that our feet were wobbling left to right? It's those muscles in here that go down, they stirrup the foot. So they're in charge of stabilizing the foot on uneven terrain, but also they're in charge of the inverting and the everting actions as well. So we have muscles all along this foreleg that are connected down into the foot, on the top of the foot, underneath the foot. Those create the anatomical stirrups. It's like right up here at the top of the arch. And then underneath the heel. And all of those muscles' jobs, when they contract and they get shorter, is to move the foot in different arrangements to the shin bones. So that is, I think, everything I have for us for the ankle today. So prepare, watch this again if you want to take in more information, especially if your feet and ankles are a little sticky bit in your practice. And then next week, we're going to work on mobility. So we're going to take everything we kind of learned today, and we're going to do all of our mobility exercises to improve our dorsiflexion, our plantar flexion, our inversion, and our eversion. And then finally, the final class in this module will be slow and steady sun salutations. Because if you notice, if you're familiar with the sun salutation sequence, then you know that it puts pressure and it stimulates the feet and the ankles in all of those different directions, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, and it really improves the range of motion there. So thank you so much for joining us today. I can also tell you, if you want to support this work and our ability to create these videos for you every week, please consider pledging to us on Patreon each month. It's the best way to become part of a community, to get your questions answered, to have a digital place, a meeting place where you can go to that you know that we're going to be here, very dedicated to the platform, and you're going to have some exposure to us as well. So thanks so much for joining, and I hope to see you here next week.